Well, I'll just say one thing, Jeff. I don't think there's much prospect of Dubbo getting another international airport, just in passing. But as a department, Civil Aviation has been for quite a time working on this. We have an interdepartmental committee of Civil Aviation Department, Treasury, Interior and Works, looking at the prospects for another international airport for the Sydney area. Now, this committee hasn't been at work all that long. I think probably something like about 15 months, which might seem, a long time to you, but when you think of the amount of work to be done, not very, very long. Their job is to look at these things and say, should there be another airport for the Sydney area? If so, when would be a likely time? Then, roughly, which are the various areas where it might be located, having regard to convenience to the travelling public in and out, the safety requirements, the wise use of public money. Now, that report ought not to be very far off being completed. One of the things that I'm asking for is to have this report as soon as I possibly can. But you'd appreciate that it must be done properly and completely when it's done, and from my point, until I get it, I can't say, nor would I say, where another airport might be, except that it's a fair bet, I think, that international airports are going to have to be located where people can effectively use them. And that looks to be where the population is.
The workers decided to extend their stoppage from 24 hours to a 48-hour period, and they also carried a resolution which linked up with the workers in Wollongong and Sydney, who also carried a similar resolution for further action, if necessary, to force home their claims with the Public Service Board.
And what are those claims?
The Crown employees are seeking an amount of increments from $1.90 to $5.70, and also other special rates up to $18.20.
I believe also there's a work to regulations program.
They've taken a stand in the course of their resolution in the three centres to impose a ban on overtime and work to regulations and to ban call-outs. That is the decision. Further point in the resolution was that if they fail to achieve their objectives on this point, that then they will go to the state government, press the government for their demands which they believe are just.
It's almost 7 years now since John Shaw last sang in Newcastle. Since that time he's reached, well, the pinnacle of international opera fame, perhaps. Tell me, John, is there still any feeling for a hometown audience?
Well, I've got a personal experience of this. Last night, I must say, was one of the most emotional nights of my career. To come back to Newcastle and to sing a recital in front of all of one's friends. I think every one of them was there last night. Very emotional for me, and I must say that I can say quite honestly, I don't think I've ever been so nervous in my life when I started. It's a wonderful experience, and I must say they reacted enormously. It was great for me last night.
You don't think then that no matter how far you go, you'll never sort of outlive this nervousness of the hometown?
No, I think that it's very odd that I suppose in a way that one would think that you'd grow out of this sort of thing, but you know, when you know that all the people with whom you started, a lot of people there last night with whom I in fact started singing musical comedy at the City Hall many years ago now, but it's still there. And when they came round last night, I must say, well, hundreds of them came round last night. I was very moved, I must say.
You don't get the same feeling with all Australian audiences?
No, mind you, I don't knock the Australian audiences as such. I think that basically the audiences are very good for us. I can't say that I feel the same about the people who do the business, who run the business in Australia. I think we Australians suffer with the hierarchy, let's say. We don't get sometimes the respect we're entitled to. But the audiences, and I've noticed this in Sydney when I've been doing Iago there recently, as you know, the audiences have been marvellous. But there is, of course, always with an audience an attraction for some. If somebody comes to sing who is unknown to them, a foreigner, and who turns out to be very good. But I think in general Australian audiences do appreciate very much their Australian singers and artists generally.
And is it visible to you as an artist that the Australian opera is perhaps financially struggling a bit?
Well, if they're struggling, they're in the same boat as every other opera company. No opera company in the world is comfortably off.
Well, can an opera singer make a reasonable living at it these days in these circumstances?
All I can say is I'm not complaining, but it's going very well for me, so it's possible to make a very good living, yes.
Well, where do you go after your Australian tour?
Well, I'm going straight back to London, to Covent Garden. I do the Ring, and then Pagliacci and Trovatore, and then I start my travels to Berlin and Munich and Philadelphia, and here, there and everywhere.
You spend most of the year travelling around them?
I spend about 7 months a year outside of England, yes.
You'd seem to prove in your own career that it is necessary for an Australian to go overseas in the arts if they're going to get anywhere. Is it true?
I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. In my own case, of course, it's worked out wonderfully well, but I don't think I could have done anything like this had I stayed in Australia.
Well, the opportunity's not here?
Well, the opportunities are not here, but also one doesn't get the opportunity to work with the best singers, with the best conductors, the best producers, in the best productions, and the standard, of course, Covent Garden and in Italy and Vienna and so forth, of course, is naturally much higher than it is here. That can't be avoided.
How's Australia going to get them back to see the best?
Well, this is a question of having a place to put them in the first place, and whether the Opera House will fill the bill or not seems to be rather doubtful. But it's a question of getting a tradition here first, getting our own singers up to a level whereby we can then bring out the best people and use them with our own singers singing with them. And but it's no doubt in my mind at all. I read the other day where one of my colleagues in Sydney said that it wasn't necessary to do this, but there's no doubt in my mind that it's an absolute must for the sophistication, for the higher standards.
There we'll have to leave it from a man who knows, John Shaw, who's been overseas to gain his experience, but still finds it pretty good to come home. Thank you, John Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, we're acting in accordance with the decision of the combined mining unions that we would come back to them and report faithfully as to what occurred on the decision. But apart from that, there's a number of clauses in the decision that are causing apprehension. One in particular is applied, of course, one in particular that gives the companies the right for a form of multiple shifting. This question has to be explained very thoroughly to our members. We feel that this clause alone justifies the calling of these aggregate meetings for a correct explanation.
You think then that winning the 35-hour week's only a partial victory?
Yes, I would say, I don't want you to misunderstand me here. I believe that the granting of a 35-hour week is a fitting climax to a long and costly struggle waged by the loyal members of the combined mining unions.
Do you think that winning the 35-hour week is going to mean far fewer stoppages in the mines in future?
Well, it's hard to say. We're hopeful. We always attempt to avoid stoppages. It's our policy to conciliate as much as we possibly can and only to stop as a last resort. We're hopeful that it will result in that.